Let me ask you something. How long have you been waiting to feel ready? Waiting to feel confident? Waiting for clarity? Waiting for the right moment? What if the reason nothing has changed is because waiting is the trap? Stay with me, because the moment you stop waiting, life starts responding differently. There is a mistake so common, so socially accepted, that most people never recognize it as the reason their life feels unfinished. It doesn't look like failure. It doesn't feel like giving up. And it rarely attracts criticism from others. In fact, it often looks responsible. It's called waiting. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting to feel confident. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for the right moment. And it quietly steals years from people who are capable of far more. Most people don't wake up one day and decide to waste their life. They drift into it slowly, politely, almost intelligently. They tell themselves they're being careful, that they're thinking things through, that they don't want to make a mistake. And so they wait. What they don't realize is this. Waiting is not neutral. Waiting is a decision. Why waiting feels safe? Waiting feels safe because it removes accountability. As long as you're waiting, nothing is your fault yet. If things don't change, you can say, I wasn't ready. I didn't have enough information. The timing wasn't right. Waiting keeps responsibility suspended in the future. It creates the illusion of progress without the risk of action. You can feel thoughtful without being exposed, prepared without being tested, hopeful without being committed. And for a while, that feels comfortable. Why smart people get stuck here? This trap doesn't catch careless people first. It catches thoughtful ones. People who think deeply. People who analyze. People who want to make the right move. They assume that clarity should come before action. That one day they'll wake up and just know. But that day rarely arrives. Because clarity is not a starting condition. It's a consequence. The myth of feeling ready. Readiness is one of the most misunderstood ideas in modern self-development. People imagine readiness as a feeling, a sense of confidence, certainty, emotional calm. But in real life, readiness is built after movement begins, not before. No one feels ready before their first difficult step. They feel anxious. They feel unsure. They feel exposed. And those feelings don't mean you're unprepared. They mean you're doing something real. What waiting does to the mind. When waiting becomes a habit, something subtle happens inside the brain. Your nervous system begins to associate safety with stillness. Movement starts to feel dangerous. Action feels dramatic. Change feels threatening. Over time, even small steps feel overwhelming. Not because they're hard, but because you've trained yourself to pause instead of move. Waiting becomes your comfort zone, and comfort zones shrink lives. A modern, real-life scenario, USA relatable. Imagine someone working a job that doesn't reflect their ability. They know they're capable of more. They talk about it with friends. They watch videos. They read books. Years pass. They're still getting ready. They're waiting to feel confident enough to apply elsewhere. Waiting to feel qualified enough to start something new. Waiting to feel certain they won't fail. What they're really waiting for is a version of themselves that only exists after action. The cost that never gets counted. Waiting rarely feels expensive in the moment, but it accumulates silently. Months become years. Years become patterns. Patterns become identity. Eventually, people stop saying, I haven't started yet, and start saying, this is just how life is. Not because it had to be that way, but because waiting trained them to accept less. Why life doesn't interrupt the waiting. Here's a hard truth. Life does not step in to rescue people from waiting. There is no external signal that says, now it's time. Life assumes that adults will claim authorship of their direction. When you wait, life does not argue with you. It simply continues without adjusting to your potential. Waiting versus authorship. There is a fundamental difference between people who wait and people who change their trajectory. People who wait ask, is this the right move? What if I fail? What if I choose wrong? People who ask, what am I willing to take responsibility for? What can I adjust after I start? What's the next step I can live with? One group looks for permission. The other accepts ownership. The invisible shift. The moment life begins to change is quiet. There is no announcement. It happens when someone internally says, I may not feel ready, but I'm responsible anyway. That sentence doesn't feel inspiring. It feels heavy. But that weight is adulthood. And that weight creates direction. Why waiting isn't caution, it's avoidance. Caution evaluates risk. Waiting avoids responsibility. Caution still moves forward, carefully. Waiting stays still while pretending to plan. One builds experience. The other builds excuses. The lie of perfect conditions. There has never been a moment in history where conditions were perfect for personal growth. Uncertainty is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. People who move learn by adjusting. People who wait hope conditions will do the work for them. They never do. What this part is asking you to notice. This is not about rushing. It's not about impulsive action. It's about noticing how often waiting is being used as protection. Protection from failure. Protection from judgment. Protection from responsibility. And asking yourself one honest question. What would change if I stopped waiting to feel ready and started acting as the author of my life? Waiting keeps life theoretical. Responsibility makes it real. In the next part, we'll explore what actually reminds life that you're serious. Not motivation, not insight, but ownership. Because the moment responsibility is claimed, life responds differently. Stay with me. The responsibility shift when life actually starts responding. There is a moment in every adult life that rarely gets talked about honestly. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel empowering. And it doesn't arrive with confidence. It arrives quietly, as the realization that no one is coming to take responsibility for you. Not your parents. Not society. Not circumstances. Not time. And the moment you truly understand that, life begins to change. Not because things get easier, but because you stop pretending someone else is in charge. Why life ignores potential. Most people believe life responds to talent. They believe intelligence, good intentions, or hard work alone should be enough. But life doesn't respond to potential. It responds to ownership. You can be capable and still remain stuck. You can be insightful and still repeat the same year. You can be motivated and still drift. Until responsibility is claimed, nothing reorganizes. Life treats unclaimed potential like unused space. The difference between seeing and owning. There's a critical difference between understanding your situation and owning your situation. Understanding says, I see what's wrong. Owning says, this is mine to change, even if I don't fully understand how yet. Understanding observes. Ownership commits. Life responds to commitment, not commentary. Why responsibility feels heavy at first. Responsibility feels uncomfortable because it removes your escape routes. Once you own something, you can no longer blame. Timing, luck, people, systems. That doesn't mean those things don't exist. It means they no longer decide your direction. Responsibility places the weight back where it belongs, on choice. And weight is uncomfortable before it becomes strength. A common confusion that stops people. Many people confuse responsibility with self-blame. They are not the same. Blame looks backward. Responsibility looks forward. Blame says, this is my fault. Responsibility says, this is my direction to correct. One traps you in regret. The other puts you in motion. A modern, U.S. relatable scenario. Consider someone who feels financially stuck. They work hard. They're tired. They talk about the economy, inflation, unfair systems. Much of that may be true, but nothing changes while the conversation stays there. Life begins to shift when the question changes from, why is this happening to me? To, What am I willing to take responsibility for improving? That question doesn't solve everything, but it changes posture, and posture changes behavior. Why ownership creates energy. Something unexpected happens when responsibility is accepted. Energy returns, not because the situation improves, but because the internal argument stops. When responsibility is unclear, energy leaks through doubt and hesitation. When responsibility is claimed, effort becomes focused. You stop asking, "Should I?" and start asking, "What's next?" Responsibility is not a feeling. This is critical to understand. You don't feel responsible and then act. You act responsibly, and the feeling follows. This is why waiting to feel motivated keeps people stuck. Responsibility is not emotional. It's positional. You take the position first. Your emotions catch up later. The shift from reaction to direction. Without responsibility, life feels reactive. You respond to stress. You react to problems. You adjust to pressure. With responsibility, life becomes directional. You choose priorities. You set standards. You decide what gets attention and what doesn't. Even small actions feel different when chosen deliberately. Why most people avoid this shift? Because responsibility ends comfort. Once you own your direction, you lose the ability to hide behind explanations. You can't say, "I'm just waiting to see what happens." You are what's happening, and that can feel intimidating. But it's also where dignity begins. The end of outsourcing. Many people unknowingly outsource their future. To mood. To timing. To approval. To certainty. Responsibility ends outsourcing. You stop asking, "Is this the right time?" and start asking, "What step can I take despite uncertainty?" That question changes everything. Why life responds differently after this shift. Once responsibility is taken seriously, your behavior changes. You follow through more often. You explain yourself less. You tolerate less drift. People notice, not because you announce it, but because consistency builds credibility. And credibility attracts opportunity. A quiet but powerful realization. You don't need to control everything. You only need to control what you claim responsibility for. That alone is enough to change trajectory. The moment that matters most. The responsibility shift doesn't happen once. It happens whenever you stop waiting for conditions to improve and decide to move anyway. That's when life starts responding. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. Slow transition, set up for part 3. Responsibility initiates movement. But movement alone doesn't last. Many people start strong, then fade. In the next part, we'll explore why consistency matters more than motivation, and how identity is built through repeated action, not intention. Stay with me. Identity in action. Why who you act as matters more than what you want. There is a moment after responsibility is claimed, where many people quietly lose momentum. Not because they stopped caring, not because they gave up, but because they misunderstood what actually sustains change. They believed that once they decided, once they owned their direction, the hard part was over. It isn't. The hardest part begins when no one is watching. Why most change doesn't last. Most people assume change fails because motivation fades. That's not the real reason. Change fails because identity stays the same. You can make new plans with an old identity. You can set new goals while still acting like your former self. And eventually, behavior returns to what feels familiar. Not what you want, but what you believe you are. The hidden question behind every action. Every decision you make answers a silent question. What kind of person am I? You may not hear it consciously, but your nervous system hears it every time. When identity and action are misaligned, action always loses, because the mind will always protect identity over ambition. Why wanting is weaker than being. Wanting lives in the future. Being lives in the present. Wanting says, "One day I'll become disciplined. I'm trying to be consistent." I hope I can change. Being says, this is how I operate now. Life responds to what you enact, not what you desire. A modern American example. Think of someone who says, I'm trying to get in shape. Now listen to how they speak. I'll start Monday. I was tired today. I'll get serious soon. Compare that to someone who quietly says, I train. They don't negotiate daily. They don't dramatize it. They don't wait to feel inspired. They act in alignment with identity. And that alignment removes friction. Identity is built through repeated proof. Identity is not declared. It's earned through repetition. Each small action is a vote. Each follow-through is evidence. Each excuse weakens the case. You don't become reliable by thinking about reliability. You become reliable by behaving reliably, especially when it's inconvenient. Why consistency feels boring and why that's good. Early change feels exciting. Later change feels repetitive. That's where most people stop. They confuse boredom with failure. But boredom is actually a sign of stabilization. It means your nervous system is adjusting to a new standard. Real transformation feels quiet. It lacks drama. It lacks applause. And that's why it works. The identity gap that sabotages people. Many people try to jump identities too fast. They attempt to act like the finished version of themselves, without building the foundation. This creates internal resistance. Instead of asking, how do successful people live? Ask, what would the next level version of me do today? Not dramatically, not perfectly, but consistently. Identity is a standard, not a mood. This is critical. Identity is what you do regardless of mood. Mood changes hourly. Identity persists daily. If your behavior depends on how you feel, you don't have identity yet. You have intention. And intention collapses under pressure. Why small actions matter more than big decisions. Big decisions feel powerful. Small actions shape identity. Skipping one commitment doesn't seem serious. Breaking one promise feels harmless. But identity is built in these moments. Not when it's easy, but when you're tempted to let it slide. A simple but powerful reframe. Instead of asking, do I feel like doing this? Ask, what kind of person doesn't skip this? That question removes negotiation. It turns behavior into alignment. Identity creates self-respect. Self-respect is not confidence. It's trust in your own follow-through. And trust is built slowly. Each time you keep your word to yourself, you reinforce the identity of someone who can be relied upon. That changes posture, tone, decision-making. Others feel it, even if they can't explain it. Why people notice before results appear. Results lag behind identity, but behavior changes immediately. You show up differently. You speak differently. You tolerate less nonsense. This creates momentum before success is visible. And momentum attracts opportunity. The real reason discipline feels hard. Discipline feels hard when it conflicts with identity. When discipline is identity, it feels normal. That's the goal. Not forcing yourself endlessly, but becoming someone who doesn't need constant force. A hard but liberating truth. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your standards. And standards are expressions of identity. Identity is shaped in private. The most important actions happen when no one will ever know. No likes, no feedback, no recognition, just alignment. That's where identity is decided. Why this part matters. Responsibility starts movement. Identity sustains it. Without identity, responsibility burns out. With identity, progress compounds. Slow transition, set up for part 4. But identity is fragile early on. Old habits resist. Old environments pull back. Old comfort whispers. In the next part, we'll talk about how to protect direction, not from the world, but from erosion, because nothing destroys growth faster than unguarded momentum. Stay with me. Protecting direction. How to keep moving when no one is applauding. There is a stage of growth that quietly decides everything. It happens after responsibility has been claimed, after identity has begun to shift, after behavior has started to change. And this is where most people lose what they worked to build. Not because they failed, but because they stopped protecting direction. Why progress is most fragile after it begins. Starting is difficult, but continuing is harder. In the beginning, change feels meaningful. You feel different. You feel focused. You feel serious. Then life returns to normal. No applause. No immediate reward. No dramatic confirmation. And without protection, direction erodes. The quiet enemies of direction. Direction is not destroyed by one big mistake. It's worn down by small leaks. Distraction that feels harmless. Comfort that feels deserved. Opinions that sound reasonable. Flexibility that turns into drift. None of these feel dangerous alone. Together, they dissolve momentum. Why most people regress without noticing. Regression rarely announces itself. It sounds like, "I'll do it tomorrow. I've earned a break. I'm still doing better than before." All true. All dangerous. Progress doesn't disappear. It softens. Standards loosen. Consistency thins. Identity weakens. Until one day, you realize you're back in familiar territory. Direction requires defense, not motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Direction needs guarding. You don't motivate yourself to protect something valuable. You prioritize it. And priority shows up in boundaries. The role of boundaries in growth. Boundaries are not restrictions. They are clarity made visible. A boundary says, "This matters enough to be protected." Without boundaries, everything competes for your attention. And attention scattered long enough becomes direction lost. A modern American context. Think about how many people are busy, but not progressing. Full calendars. Endless notifications. Constant input. Movement without direction feels productive, but it's exhausting. Direction requires saying no more often than yes. What you allow shapes what you become. Environment always wins over intention. If your environment constantly pulls you toward comfort, your direction will weaken, no matter how strong your resolve is. Protecting direction means designing surroundings that support alignment. Not perfection. Support. The power of routine as defense. Routine isn't boring. It's protective. Routine reduces decision fatigue. It removes negotiation. It stabilizes behavior. You don't rely on willpower. You rely on structure. That's how progress survives stress. Why successful people appear calm. Calm is not lack of pressure. It's lack of internal conflict. When direction is protected, choices become simpler. Not easier, simpler. And simplicity creates composure. Defending against external noise. As you grow, opinions increase. Some will be supportive, some skeptical, some subtly discouraging. Not malicious, just misaligned. You don't need to argue. You need to filter. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every suggestion deserves consideration. Direction weakens when every voice is equal. The cost of over-explaining yourself. Explaining drains energy. Especially explaining growth to people committed to familiarity. Silence preserves strength. Results speak more clearly than justification ever could. Why discipline must evolve. Early discipline is force. Later discipline is maintenance. You don't push as hard. You guard more carefully. That's maturity. The dangerous comfort zone of almost there. Progress creates a new temptation. Settling. You've improved enough to be comfortable, but not enough to be fulfilled. This is where ambition quietly dies. Protecting direction means refusing to stop at better than before. How to know if direction is strong? Ask yourself, do I follow through even when no one knows? Do I recover quickly after disruption? Do my habits align with my values? Do I protect my time intentionally? If yes, direction is alive. If not, it needs reinforcement. Direction is a daily practice. You don't protect direction once. You renew it daily. Not with intensity, with consistency. The final internal shift. Eventually, something settles inside you. You stop chasing validation. You stop comparing pace. You stop questioning every step. You move quietly, deliberately, steadily. That's when growth becomes inevitable. Why this is the true definition of success. Success is not speed. It's sustainability. Anyone can change briefly. Few can protect direction long enough to transform permanently. The long view. Years from now, the difference won't be talent. It won't be luck. It will be who protected direction, while others negotiated it away. Final reflection, strong close. Waiting ends when responsibility is claimed. Responsibility holds when identity aligns. Identity lasts when direction is protected. That's the full arc. And once you understand it, you stop searching for signals. You become steady enough that life adjusts around you. Not suddenly, but permanently.